everybody, and welcome to Rogos. For this first plenary of the event, I would like to introduce Professor George Mikros. It's an honor for me and a pleasure to introduce George Mikros and give him the floor for his talk. George Mikros is currently a professor at the MA program of Digital Humanities in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at the Hamad bin Khalifa University of Qatar. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Since 1999 until 2019, he has been a professor of computational and quantitative linguistics at the University of Athens, Greece. He's the director of the Computational Stylistics Lab. Since 2014, he's also professor at the Department of Applied Linguistics at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, USA. He had the position of Research Associate at the Institute of Language and Speech Processing. He was part of research groups that have developed important language resources and tools for modern Greek. And since 1999, he holds the position of Teaching Associate at the Hellenic Open University. From 2016 till 2019, he was the director of the undergraduate program, Spanish Language and Culture. Professor Mikros has authored 5 reviewed journals, conference proceedings, and edited volumes. Since 2007, he has been elected as a member of the Council of the International Association of Quantitative Linguistics. In the period 2018-2021, he served as his president. He is the keynote speaker in many international conferences, workshops, summer schools related to digital humanities and quantitative linguistics. His main research interests are computational stylistics, quantitative linguistics, computational linguistics, and forensic linguistics. Today, he will talk about computational stylistics in digital humanities, some applications. I welcome Professor Mikros. The floor is yours.
Sorry, forgive me. Just one moment. I'll just minimize this and this up. Oh, there it is. There it is. Oh, yeah, sorry. Close that. How do I? It's just right here. Let's move them out of the way.
Yeah.
1 second, I'll go back to share the screen first. Okay.
Yeah. Just give me a sec.
It's okay.
Yep.
Oh.
Sorry. Just to make it full screen here.
You're better at this than me. Yes. Press again.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be here. Many thanks to both the permanent and the local organizing committee. Is it better now? Great. So it's my first actual talk after the COVID break. So I really feel mixed feelings, really. It's wonderful to be around real people, not Zoom tiles. And also reminds me how our social skills have been diminished over these 3 years. We have time here, this wonderful place, and this wonderful organization to rebrand them, re-energize them. So thank you again so much. My talk today will be about computational stylistics. And just to give you the general framework of my research field, is part of what we call natural language processing. And what we do actually is trying computers to understand human language. And this is really tough, as you know. Now, human language has a lot of different dimensions. Now, here we will focus on a specific, very specific aspect of human language usage, and this is the stylistics aspects. And when we say stylistics, we can actually have another conference about the definition of style, but very, I would say simply, I will put it, computational stylistics is all about trying to teach computers to analyze the way people are writing, not what they are writing, but how they are writing anything. So just to give you a very brief overview of what I will share with you today. So I'll give you some very basic introduction to computational stylistic principles. And then I have prepared a couple of applications related to computational stylistics. What this kind of research can offer us, both in the humanities field, but in general, even in social studies, social analytics, and so on. Let's start by some analysis. So you all know fingerprints, right? This is a fingerprint, and this is the basic forensic technology for linking someone, a biometric evidence of someone with his or her identity. Now, we know that fingerprints have been devised like in the 19th century, and they're working quite well. We have other options of biometrics. This is iris scan. You've been to the airports and probably your iris has been scanned multiple times. Again, this kind of biometric technique gives us a high percentage of identification. And of course, we have DNA. DNA is the king of the biometric methods. And you know that if your DNA has been found somewhere, can be linked with you with a false acceptance rate like 1 in 1 billion, theoretically. So we have this kind of techniques that links our identities with some evidence of our behavior, of our natural appearance and presence. So the idea here is, can we have something with the text when we're trying to write something? Is our way of writing, our style, connected to our identity? And if this is the case, can we really use information from this style to make connections to our identity? And very practically, can we use written text to identify authors without even knowing it, without the text have been signed by them? So this is the whole idea about stylometry. Now, stylometry is quite an old discipline. I would say this is really interesting. Goes back even from Saussure. It's the first applications, the first ideas about stylometry came out around the mid-19th century. And people realized that some specific aspects of your linguistic behavior can be quantified and can be quite declarative of your identity. Now, the whole idea, the principle behind stylometry says a very, I would say, simple thing, that each author has a very unique way to express him or herself. And author and language usage are biuniquely related. That means that I, George, can write anything, and my personality, my identity can be codified in my texts. And whenever as me, I can produce only texts that are linked to me. And also if I examine specific texts and I run a number of quantitative analysis on this text, these texts can also show me as the only author. This is the biuniquely relation of stylometry. So another parameter we take into account is that the style never changes. Of course, there are numerous experiments that say this is not true, but as a working definition, and when we are trying to analyze language in authors in a specific time frame, we can more or less say that in a decade, more or less, an author writes the same way. And the holy grail, I would say, of stylometry is to find out which are the linguistic features that remain quantitative stable and do not change over the time, over the years, not even when the author changes topics, right? Writes in an email and then writes an academic paper. Can we find these features in his language that are being stable, quantitatively at least? And what are these features? What are these features? What's the nature of the features, the linguistic features we are trying to find? So the first idea is, of course, to have a look at the conscious linguistic choices. And when I say conscious linguistic choices, obviously we're talking about vocabulary, right? So we try to find words that have a specific meaning for the author. But actually, we in stylometry at least, we are looking all the other way down on the opposite side. We don't really care about words. And why is that? Because words carry meaning, and the meaning is related to the communicative instance of the textual production. So we don't really want to mess topic with author. That's why we're trying to find other vocabulary elements that do not carry meaning. And one of the best candidates for this category is function words. Function words, if you remember, are these small words we're using when we are linking sentences, for example, articles, prepositions, conjunctions, exclamatives, right? These kind of words, which do not carry a lexical meaning, have a very, very strong ability to measure the author's identity. And we are using them for analyzing patterns of authorial imprint in texts. Now, this is a very, I would say, rough representation, ontology of the features we're trying to measure in the text so the text can actually reveal their authors. There are many, just I will give you a very brief overview. So we have phonological and graphemic features like word length, how big words we're using in the text, frequency of phoneme and graphemes, character engrams. I will come to these features later, but they are very strong authorial features. Even spelling deviations carry a lot of information about the authors. I will stop a little bit and share a story. A couple of decades before, a woman in Australia found dead, and it was a suicide note right next to her. And the suicide note actually was saying, you know, what most suicide letters say, that there's a reasoning why she committed suicide. But the whole letter had been written with British spelling. So after some investigation, it was found out that her husband was actually British. So at the end, he confessed. And here were actually our spelling mistakes or our spelling choices reflect our identity sometimes. We have a number of morphological and lexicological features we are using very frequently. I already mentioned you the function words, but there are also a number of indices that capture linguistic creativity in the text, quantitative indices. There are many of them actually. And sometimes even we use very, very specific content words. If you remember, if you recall, a case that came out in New York Times like 3 years ago, where Trump was running the United States as a president, there was an open ed letter at the New York Times, and there was someone from his cabinet that actually told people that, you know, we are here with Trump, but we would not support him really. We're just watching him closely, not to do anything stupid. And that was quite a shock because, you know, we're talking about United States. And this open ed letter was actually anonymous. And a lot of people tried to find out who was the real author of this op-ed. And there were many speculations. One of the interesting things when we analyzed this text was the guy who wrote this had a very weird word, Lone Star. And Lone Star was the only word that has been found in specific minister's speech. You couldn't find other people using this word. Of course, nobody actually admitted that he was the real author. But here comes the selection of content words. So specific content words that are kind of rare, kind of characteristic, and idiosyncratic in meaning or frequency sometimes carry authorial information and can be really revealing about who writes the text. And of course, we have a number of syntactic features that we ran a lot of tests on them, like how complex syntax someone uses, part of speech, frequency and distributions. And of course, if we go down to the road of social media, emoticons, for example, are very characteristic of authors. A couple of years ago, we ran some tests on gender profiling, whether a tweet has been written by a male or female, and using only the tweets, the emoticons, the frequency of the emoticons, we can somehow predict the gender by 95, 96%, only counting emoticons, right? Because women use a lot of emoticons compared to men, at least. So there are so many features in the writing that actually reveal who you are, even if you don't like to be revealed. And I will go to a case where we use this kind of technology to reveal someone who didn't want to be revealed. Applications are really numerous and they're expanding. In literature, why use this kind of technology? Because we want to find out who wrote a piece of literary text. Why this is important? Obviously for literary historical reasons. Obviously because we want to find out the map of a literature movement in a specific era. And there are so many cases out there before 19th century, before the Bonn Convention of the copyright, where actually you could go to any library, take a book and put your name there and you had your own copy, personalized copy. There are so many books there who do not have an author or have multiple authors and nobody knows who wrote them. Even in cases of historical, very important historical ornithological texts, where it is really important to know who actually wrote this. Okay. Of course, another obvious buyer of this technology is forensics, right? And stylometry is really helping out to fight crime over, especially the social media, but also before, in numerous cases of forensic linguistics. Of course, we're using this kind of technology also for text reuse and plagiarism. Most software and platforms we are using in our academic platforms, like Turnitin, Authenticate, and etc., use a stylometric compound part that analyzes and validates the authenticity of the text. Information retrieval, social sites, vandalism, education, you name it. That's a really long list of applications, not only the humanities, in the broader sense of many, many fields. Now, I will give you a very brief overview of authorship attribution problems we are dealing with computational stylistics, and then I will give you specific examples of these technologies and applications. So there are actually three types of authorship problems. One is what we call authorship attribution. And I will won't skip that just a second. What is authorship attribution? Is when you have a closed set of candidate authors, and there is a text that is it has not been signed by any one of them, but you're pretty sure that someone of these 3, 4, 5, 10 authors has written this text. So this is a closed problem, right? The candidates are a specific number of people, and you're pretty sure that anything that has been written comes out from these people. This is considered right now, with the state of the art, a solved problem, more or less. If you have like 5,000 words from each author, it's done. Most of these methods we're using, the supervised classification methods of machine learning, are approaching this problem really good, and we're having accuracies of nearly 100%. So under these assumptions, this problem is considered solved in computational statistics. Another much more difficult problem is the author's verification. Here, the scenario is kind of different. So you have a text which is not signed by anyone, and you have some candidate authors, but also there might be someone outside this closed group. For example, you wake up in the morning and you get an email, and this mail is threatening to you and say, you know, you will die in 5 days if you don't do something. And you might have some people that don't like you and say, oh, might be John, might be Barbara, whatever. But on the other hand, might be anyone else. And you're not really sure who wrote that. You don't have a very specific. This is open problem. And this is much harder, because what you're trying to do is create language models for all people that actually are native speakers of your language, and then do a comparison of the text with these models. So it's completely open problem, much harder to solve computationally, and still active research area. And the third problem in our studies is what we call author profiling. And in this kind of problems, we are not really care about the identity of the author. We care about meta characteristics of the author. That is his gender or her gender, age, whether it's adult or senior or whatever, his psychological profile, personality, his native language, so many different layers of information related to author, but not his identity. This is also one of the problems that works really well with computational statistics. And now we have reliable models that can calculate all of this and predict all this kind of information for the authors. That means gender, age, personality, and native language are all of them really working well. In English are like over 90% accuracies. And even in Greek, they work really well. Okay, I will go directly to some basic methodology, how we do this kind of research. So what we have, first of all, is actually pre-processing the texts. Then we are selecting the features we think are relevant to our aim. Then we convert these countings into vectors. We create arithmetical vectors of the text. So the text now are becoming actually Excel sheets, right? This is the idea of document term representation. And we run some algorithms there. There are so many of them right now. Deep learning is one of the best choices we have, but there are also more old algorithms that work really well in these types of problems. And we validate our results first in a known set of texts, and then we run the whole thing in the wild, and we're trying to realize whether it works and solves an actual authorship problem. Engrams, as I told you before, are very, very good features for counting and revealing authors of information. Engrams are just sequences of either characters or words or even other linguistic units. And the idea for engrams is actually you create a window of 2, 3, or even bigger sequences of characters or other linguistic elements, and you calculate the frequency by moving the window one character or one unit on your right. So it's a moving window and calculates all the frequencies of these consecutive elements and works really well. Now, this is what most of the times when we have especially literary people, I also hear now some screams, oh my God, this is Dostoevsky. Yes, actually, this is Dostoevsky. So it's a document term representation. That means Dostoevsky here in Crime and Punishment has been converted to a number of vectors, but we didn't really do any harm to Dostoevsky right now. We just calculated the frequencies. Here actually are the frequencies of the most frequent character bigrams, and that's it. I mean, we just restructured the document and created a quantitative profile of the document, and that's it. But this is only the version that an algorithm can understand, right? You cannot train an algorithm on clear text. You need to make numbers out of the text so you can infer various categories then. I'll skip the various feature strategies we're using. There are so many. I prefer, especially what you see here, I stack a number of different features. So I prefer to create big feature representations of different type and different size. So I create character bigrams, character trigrams, word unigrams, word bigrams. That means I connect a number of different engram features, and then I use these representations for training the algorithms. And why I prefer this kind of stack representations? Because these kind of features actually fall into different linguistic levels and can carry a lot of information. You can see here, there's a mapping of linguistic levels. So you touch more or less semantics, syntax, morphology, and phonology. The basic linguistic levels more or less are being represented in your representation. And that gives a rich representation, linguistically rich representation that can be of you can really do a lot of stuff with it. You can extract information from the text in various ways. Okay, I'll skip the supervised learning and the AI stuff just to go to directly one of the applications, if I'm okay. How many minutes do I have? Can I ask? I'll stick with the Elena Ferrante. So you guys probably know Elena Ferrante, maybe you know better than me. So Elena Ferrante is a very, very iconic Italian author, novelist. She is one of the biggest literary operas she has written. Is a trilogy of Napoli. She's very well known in Italy. She has been translated in so many other languages. And the interesting thing about Elena is that we know, because she has stated, it's not her real name, it's a pseudonym. Now, this is interesting, but even more interesting is that Elena Ferrante is a persona. It's not just an author. She has a column in Guardian, right? She writes a lot of, she actually gives interviews using the persona, not the real name. So it's a very interesting profile. And people were wondering who she is really. And this chase of finding out who is Elena Ferrante started like 20 years ago and continues till now. The interesting thing is that this was kind of isolated attempts. So there were some scholars that tried to find out using some methodologies. Most of them were quantitative, stylometrical. Other were not that much, not that stylometric, but more traditional literary theorists that tried to find out who is Elena Ferrante. Now, in 2016, an Italian reporter called Gatti works as a freelancer in New York Times supplement, tried to find out using another method. So he digged in the IRS records, realized that actually Elena Ferrante might be the translator of the Ferrante's writings, Raya. Now, this information came by looking the wealth of Raya. This is from interesting to unethical to a certain extent, right? So he had some information, inside information from IRS, and he denoted that the translator of Elena was in like 10 years, she had a huge apartment in Manhattan, some villas in Florida, in Italy. Like, she became really rich. I don't know who is translator here, but you don't go rich that in 10 years. Yeah, or else everyone will be translator, right? So something was really weird. And there were some evidence of that kind. And then in 2017, University of Padua, two professors, one is H22, which is professor of statistics at the social sciences department. And the other one was Michele Cortellaccio, professor of linguistics at the School of Philosophy, thought to create a kind of challenge to stylometrists around the world. So they offer us a full corpus of Italian, modern Italian language that would be 40 authors, 150 novels. Here in this 150 novels, there were Elena Ferrante's works there, a total of 10 million words. And they told us a very simple stuff. You know, here's the corpus. Try to find out who is Elena Ferrante. It was a game, actually, a challenge. And we're 5 of us who took the challenge and thought, yeah, let's try it. Let's find out whether technology can actually answer this. So I think the important issue here, and I want to discuss with you, it's not what we found, but how I personally attacked this problem. And this, if you recall the previous discussion we had, this could be considered a closed problem, right? Arjuna and Michele told me, you know, there are 40 authors, and Elena is one of them. But is this the real case? We don't know. It's highly probable, because her writing is so elaborated that obviously she must be a professional writer. But again, someone is not there. So I had to devise a method that actually was hybrid, that works like a close classification problem, but takes into account wider perspectives, more open perspectives. So what I did was actually attack the problem from other angle. That means use author profiling methods. That means trying to find out first if the author, Elena, is a man or a woman. Then trying to find out whether he's over 60, 40 to 60, under 40. Then go down and profile the author's town and author's region. Try to find out from what part of the Italy this writing came. And if you combine these sets, you get a very small intersection. You take a huge sample and then you restrict it because you filter it, you do consecutive filters. So I did exactly 4 profilings, one after the other. And here are the results. I will skip the technical stuff. The gender profiling. So I asked my algorithm, I create a model about Italian authors, male and female Italian authors. And the model we created was detecting gender correctly, 95%. This is the accuracy here. And we ran the test on the Elena Ferrante's results, and we got a surprise. Actually, it came out was a male. And the accuracy there, the cross-validation example, was 96%. So the model was telling us the opposite of what we could think, and opposite what Gatti said, actually, that Raya was the one that was writing this stuff. So one surprise after the other. Now, we just erased half of our corpus because now we are focusing only on male authors. And here we are. Here are the male authors of this study, of this corpus. And then we went one step further, region profiling. Why we do region profiling? Because Italian is super dialectic, right? And it's so easy to create models of dialects. And we did that 90% accuracy of dialect identification. And we ran this, and Ferrante comes from Campania. It's southern Italy, 98% accuracy. We are pretty sure now we are looking at the male from Campania. So look what happened. We just filter out and we have quite few people there, candidates. Now we are getting our heads over and say, okay, let's go one step further. Let's predict from what town he writes. I know it's kind of superfluous, I would say, but actually it worked. 94% accuracy in the cross-validated corpus, and it seems that Ferrante comes from the town Saviano, which there's only one guy there. Okay, it's Domenico Starnone, and this, I remind you, this does not come from an authorship identification. We just filter out various profiles, combine, took the intersection. We didn't have even an assumption of who might be the author. And then we played a little bit with the age profiling, 92% accuracy, and Ferrante came that he was over 60. And from our corpus, only these 4 guys were over 60, and Starnone is one of them. And you can now, of course, understand whether you can triangulate these methods and have even better idea who is the real author. So we are pretty sure that we created a tree of filters that if we run down to them, either case, whatever kind of features we're using, we came to Domenico Starnone as the only possible stylometrically relevant author. Now, I know it's kind of, I'm only 10 minutes after. I want to stop now, and thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you very much for a really intriguing talk. Now the floor is open for questions. Who is Ferrante, after all?
It's Domenico Starnone, yes.
So
this is our best case.
Phone.
More or less, he doesn't want to confess it though.
Okay. He hasn't. Okay. Now, questions to the author. Yes, please.
Just like very fascinating stuff. I was wondering, does that work with the collective authors?
Wonderful.
Thinking about people like implicit or me, but there's a collective of authors with their pseudonyms can identify different profiles.
This is one of the most fascinating research areas right now, detecting collaborative authorship. We're working now on Tolkien's work, and you know, Tolkien has written most of his works actually has been edited heavily by his son, and this is an excellent example of collaborative authorship. We can do that as long as we have clear and quite big samples of the writings of the people involved. And also, we're pretty sure that this is a closed problem, that we know definitely that 2 peoples are there, or 3. If we know that and we have enough data, it's pretty much solvable.
Can you also compare oral speech to written discourse and see
Yes, but this
thicker is the author as well?
when people are changing modalities, when they're talking, they're creating quite different stylometric profiles. So you need a lot of information in order to connect them.
To identify.
And they're not really working well right now.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for this inviting presentation. I have a question that's actually common question. So the work on translation now, rethinking my career in translation. So and have you tried it on Arabic, for instance? Other languages would it be the same efficiency coming up?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Arabic. There are a number of works that right now that even using the more traditional ways of stylometry, not the latest deep neural net or whatever. Arabic stylometry has been evolved quite a lot the last, I would say, 10 years.
So it's working the same. I mean,
It's the same method, yes.
I mean, you can get as efficient results.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And translation?
Translation, very interesting. You know, in translation, there's a long debate, theoretical debate about whether a translator is visible or not, you know, the invisible translator. What it has been found actually from the translation and the stylometric analysis of translations is that the translator is very much visible, has an identity, and you can detect him quite importantly, easily. And we have done that actually in a Greek translator and author, Papadiamantis. We had a guy who was actually reading novels, and at the same time he was a translator. And we can tell whether a specific translation has been written by him or a novel has been written by him. So translator profile and author profile can be linked using stylometry.
Comment and question. The comment comes from the dinosaur movies that just because you can, doesn't mean you should. So maybe you can say something about the ethics of what you're doing.
Wonderful. So this is actually the first, after the announcement of Ferrante's case, we had an interview from RAI, you know, came to the University of Padova, and we were 6 of us, academics, that, and the first question we got from the journalist was actually, why you did that? Why? Why? I mean, he didn't want to be, because he was really upset actually, the most. Yeah. And we just started a discussion about whether there is an ethical dimension. Of course, there's an ethical dimension there, and whether you should do that just because you can. And I think this goes by far bigger, touches issues of artificial intelligence in general, not this case only. I would say most AI techniques right now are so intrusive that you can actually raise all this kind of why you do that. An interesting, personally, I have I'm scientifically curious, and this came from my sincere, pure scientific curiosity, because science is all about finding out stuff that nobody knows, right? So it's a scientific curiosity. But there was another opinion from another colleague that said that stylometric authorship attribution is a new rebranded way of critique, a literary critique. Why you do a literary critique? Nobody asks you. right? The author doesn't want to be buried by someone in the UK or in the USA, but he got affected by this critique sometimes, and he didn't ask for a critique. Most of the times, he just published his book. So since his books are published, they can be open for various types of critiques, and stylometry is a digital way of critiquing this. And of course, there is a limit in this argument that we're revealing information that is relevant to his personal life. Even his IRS issues might harm him. And I say we're going to a gray zone where actually, as a community now, we're trying to find out where is the limits.
Thank you for answering the comment. Quick question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just wondering if you tried this on visual text and if you could tell us what that is.
That would be interesting. No.
Actually, there's an article about somebody who did geo banking images of time and place. It's a pretty problematic article, actually. I'll give you the reference. Using geographic.
Yeah.
That ran through my mind, actually. There is.
Thank you. This is fascinating. One question and also one ethical consideration. The question is if you actually, if you have tried this with the restoration, say, basic text, because it has immense predictive capabilities for the result. So we have a lot of basic text that need to be restored.
Yes.
And if you have considered this possibility for the software.
Well, we haven't actually run any prediction or authorship attribution in ancient texts, but I would say they're a lot different than the ones we're running now, the modern ones, because there are so many biases there and factors that are affecting the final text you're analyzing. There have been numerous works on this. For example, one of my PhD students, Mikros, oh my God, I forgot this. I'll tell you, he's done an amazing work on Aeschylus. And he stylometrically really demonstrated that the most well-known work of Aeschylus, that is the Prometheus Bounded, is not actually Aeschylus. And he was pretty sure, and actually this was a confirmation of a literary approach of Aeschylus, that this specific, very well-known work, it's not Aeschylus. And so yes, I prefer to be on the modern side of the text because so many unknown variables there on the ancient text, and the editions are so many, collaborative authorship might be involved there, editing stuff.
And this is where my ethical consideration lies, because there are so many variables in what in contemporary text as well. The voice mortal is their exception. Somebody may have read Monet authors, or they might have read authors of a specific idiom. So how did you make sure that, because these texts, and as they are being analyzed, they are getting they are becoming the corpus of predictive pattern as well. How do we avoid standardizing people within a specific identification that is not there?
Obviously, there is an open research area there. There are no really solved, we have not solved these issues. That's why, exactly that's why, this kind of evidence till now is not accepted in the course as prima facie evidence. It can be considered in a previous stage of when you're investigating a case, but you cannot go to the court using stylometric evidence and say, you know, this guy is guilty yet, because the method still is not there. We don't have standardized error rates. We don't pass the Dober standard of criminal validation of scientific methods. So we have a lot of things to do, but what we got here right now, we get quite impressive results. When you have assumptions locked in the way I told you, enough evidence and big size text, you get really accurate results, but you know, in a specific assumption frame. Thank you.
So I'm thinking out loud here, because in non-formal texts, if I'm in Greek, I write in Greek dialect, and if I'm not in Greek, I don't. And if I write to a Cretan, I will write in Greek dialect. If I write to someone else, I won't. And I find myself, if I speak English in Italy, I speak with an Italian accent.
Yeah.
So I'm now going to the author, because authors usually, as I suggest, are very sophisticated, and they may try to imitate the characters they are playing. And would it be possible in a stylometric study to look at the various characters and see both common denominators, but also variables that change, and then say, right, then Dostoevsky cannot control these variables that change, but can control and actually is let's say, model in the other.
Computational humanities research right now, if you go to, this is the name of a conference, runs every 1 year, CHR. So it's more or less the state of the art in our methods. The last 3 years, I would say 50% of the presentations is this, exactly, going into the persons inside the novels and trying to figure out what's happening with the reported speech. Yes, and whether the author can actually create convincing identity, stylometrically distinct from his main stylometric signal, or he's just his own voice trying with different, superficial. And there are many results. I would say, yeah.
Famous Latin poet, and recently there is a new publication that claims that quite a lot of the poems that he attributed to other people was himself.
Oh, that's interesting.
So there may be a good opportunity to quote them, but my colleague here, what she was saying is that if there are patterns of writing, because papyri, for example, are missing bits here and there, if you know that there is a greater likelihood of a specific word appearing in a specific context, you might be able to make proposals that would help the construction.
This is all classes that have been doing for ages.
Absolutely.
Choreographers, they have been doing that.
Without the computers.
I know.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for that very sort of clear description of applying natural language processing to this literary analysis. So it's very elegant and clear. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great. But the question I want to ask though is that often in natural language processing, what we do, what you're looking at stylistics is the stuff that gets eliminated as stop words, for example. So normally what people seem to be doing in natural language processing is looking at semantics.
Exactly.
Which means those stylistic words get eliminated. But they get eliminated because they're the most problematic words. They're most full of ambiguity, semantic ambiguity. So one of the questions is, what are the limits, given the fact that you're using the most problematic of all words from an NLP point of view, what are the limits of this analysis? What are the things that a stylistic analysis, in stylistic analysis, which can still only be done by humans, but on the other hand, what are the things which this kind of statistical work does which humans can't? In other words, what's the balance of those?
Thank you for this question. It's a very difficult balance, and actually, the latest approaches more now they're becoming more and more relevant, are actually skipping in whole the function words, the content words throughout the window, every word, and actually working on the collocation strength and the weights of the words. So you're going through the BERT, for example, language model, and you get what you get in the BERT. You get the weights of the collocational strength around your text. So now that works really well. And it seems that it's the next situation in our feature count. So we don't, this is one generation before research, especially the function words in the 90s and 2000. Now with the big language models, we run other stuff. Yeah, excellent point.
One last question.
And I had a question related to the questions that were previously asked about authors trying to write like other authors. And to what extent you can pull that out. And genre, how and when an author writes in different genres, do they present a different style in those different genres?
So you just highlighted the most difficult parts of stylometry. These are challenges. Cross-genre and cross-topic authorship identification are extremely hard, even now, for obvious reasons, right? Imitation corpus, there are a couple in the internet. If you look, one has been developed in Duquesne University by Patrick Yola, and we ran some experiments there. We put we actually asked the students to write imitating a specific well-known author that has a very characteristic style. So they create essays, their own essays with their own style, and then essays sounding like Hemingway, for example, let's say. And we tried to stylometrically link this production, and we failed miserably, really. It seems that the imitation is working really good, fooling stylometry. But there were, why we did that, of course, because we want to create also a second path in order to ask about ethical considerations. Can we also develop tools that someone who needs to remain anonymous, for example, posts works in Turkey and says something bad about Erdogan? You know, we really want to have someone like him protected about stylometry. So the adversarial stylometry, also development of tools, creates a number of I would say, flares in these attacks. However, it didn't work well with another approach we used recently on Google Translate. So the idea is to write your own text, put it in the Google Translate, and ask to the Google Translate to translate this to Swahili, and then translate it back to Greek, let's say. And this will mess really hard, the quantitative profile of it, but it doesn't actually. So this was an interesting, and we can open an interesting discussion later, whether how Google Translate actually affects stylometric signals in general, and we see that it doesn't affect them. And the only real bias we can introduce is by us, our cognitive environment, you know, our own wisdom and creative power to create and bias this stylometric profile, imitating someone.
Actually, all these problems really show how important this is these days.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing research that will keep on going for very long, I think, because it's so complex. So
Yes.
here in Europe, this is not like, yeah, we cannot solve this problem, so let's stop. But there's so many problems we can solve. And this is the importance, especially if we didn't have the time to show us, but because I know Professor Mikros applies this to forensics,
Yeah.
and this is where it really becomes important. And of course, it's not an evidence. That's why we show the percentages, but of course, it's some clue.
Absolutely.
Everything is a clue.
Helps the investigation.
But I would also like to know what happens to the other four researchers, and if they have, if you all concluded the same author or not, or if you had some feedback one from the other. So you
Yes,
combine
the 7 of us actually got the same result using different methods.
I think you were 5, no?
7 actually, 7. 7 we got the same result using independently, and then we ran a stacked model in our model. So we compare and we got the same. So we are pretty sure that Domenico is the allele.
Well, that's a question for keeping on the discussion now. How did they distinguish between male, female?
Yeah, I was very sure.
So this is a big talk for the garden. Yeah.
Questions in the garden. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
One more thing